Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. And we have quite an episode for you today. We're going to be talking about Down Under in Australia. You know, a lot of people have been very surprised by what the Aussies have been willing to put up with. They are, after all, an island of criminals, allegedly. They were all sent over there. I mean, their ancestors, of course, by England. Now, one might say, well, okay, what did you need to do wrong in England to be deemed a criminal and sent to Australia? Basically be a decent person and get accused of something by the British? I don't know. Anyway, we're going to get to that. That's a whole nother episode. I don't know why I'm still talking. Please, everybody, leave a like on the video on YouTube. Send us your comments. Send us your super chats before we're all going to end up living in some sort of Australian camp. Their lockdowns have always been over the top, and now there's reports of camps that are eerily similar to some from, some police states, but not everybody agrees that they are comparable. So we're going to get into that. And here's my co-host, a guy who we've disagreed in the past with analogies to East Berlin, etc. We'll see if we agree or disagree on this topic here today. It's Nikos Sotirakopoulos.
Thank you. And our disagreement has made me think of this and not use these analogies. So as Ran says, when I'm wrong and reality proves I'm wrong, we both win. So we're both winners here. Okay, so what's been happening in Australia? So we're going to look at it both in terms of what are the news, in terms of how Australia is dealing with COVID, but also how Australia has been part of the culture wars in parts in the United States, basically, and in the UK. And what are we to make of this, and what does it tell us about the state of the culture today? So we have one thing which is bad, which is COVID and Australia's reaction. We have something which is also bad, which is making up stories about Australia and throwing the concentration camp card and the Nazi cards and all that stuff. But first, let's start with the facts. So the facts are that, as we've known, Australia has had a very strict lockdown. And also Australia claims, and actually this is a question which is not very easy to dismiss. They say, look, we've had one of the strictest lockdown in the world, but also these are the results. And the results are that while in the United States, you have over 2,300 coronavirus deaths per million, 2,300 per million. In Australia, you only have 77 deaths per million. Or to put it in absolute numbers, in the United States, you have close to 800,000 deaths, actually 787,000 deaths at the time of the last report I checked. In Australia, only 2,000 deaths. So the Australian says, before you jump in, you inflexible libertarians, as someone put it in Quillette, in condemning the lockouts, notice that they work in terms of saving lives. That was the one thing. The other thing is that as COVID has spread outside of the urban centers in Australia, more towards the north of the country, and Australia is it's a country where big parts are uninhabited. So the spread has been very, very slow. But it has spread to indigenous communities, to communities of people whose way of life and whose way of where they live and how they live is different from the average urban citizen of Australia. So these are communities with people who mostly live in packed houses, and there are people who, for one reason or another, their lifestyle makes them more susceptible, let's say, to bad results with COVID, and their vaccination rates are lower. So what happened there was a big mobilization, allegedly with the cooperation and the consent of these communities, to make sure that people who were thought of having been into contact with people who have COVID have put in COVID camps, so to speak. So these are something like, think them about places where you go in quarantine, and someone is bringing you coffee, food, and all that stuff, but you are in quarantine and you're not allowed to leave. Now, what does this have to do with the culture wars? There were some people in Australia, which turns out they were completely unreliable and complete nutters, who started throwing stories and showing videos that were not even from these communities, saying that there has been a war directed by the Australian state against the indigenous communities. There were claims that the army was intervening and were kidnapping basically their children and forcefully vaccinating them. And this very quickly caught up. So there was a feud between Claire Lehmann of Quillette and people like Tim Pool and Majid Nawaz, who were reproducing these stories. And the idea was, Claire Lehmann was saying, no, people, you have to keep into mind that what you're reproducing are lies. And the other side was like, okay, yeah, maybe some of these things are lies, but if you're not very angry with what is happening in Australia, you're not paying attention. And basically, you're an apologist of the system. So this is where we find ourselves. We find ourselves in lies being spreading about Australia, culture warriors in the West, people who are very, very reluctant to accept any institutional or official narrative about COVID, jumping on these stories and saying, see, Australia is where the West is heading, which is basically concentration camps and the army kidnapping you and putting you in these camps. And on the other side, people saying, look, these are lies, and all these are happening with the consent of these people. And if you have 30 people living in a house, you cannot isolate in that house. Therefore, you go to an internment camp, or however you want to call them. Basically, they're quarantine facilities where people are having a good time, as much as a good time you can have in quarantine. And we had people, posting selfies, women with bikinis, sunbathing, and all that stuff. So this is the story. These are the two narratives. And where do we find ourselves in all this, Rucka? First of all, does it make sense what the drama was about?
Yeah, I mean, it's another manifestation of what happens daily, which is a combination of people having a blurry view and understanding of things, seen through a foggy philosophical kind of tool set, and lack of clarity, I think, is what I would sum it up to. Mix that with some zeal, some serious, angry zealotry coming from various directions, and just general miscommunication. So returning to the topic, the question of, are we in East Germany, or are we in Nazi Germany, which is what you hear people throwing around now in response to these types of camps or vaccination mandates. I will offer you, we are in the Weimar Republic. This is not Pollyannish. I'm not wearing rose-colored glasses and saying, "Oh, don't worry, guys. We're just in Germany 10 years before they turned into the Third Reich." If we are comparable to anything, I think now on a global scale, because the world is flat, as one book once put it, which I have not read, but I think the point that book was making is that communication has gotten so efficient that the world has become kind of like one place. And this was written in like the 90s or 2000s. Now imagine what the internet has done. The world, the developed world, is basically similar to the state of Germany in the midst of chaos before fascism completely took hold. So they had major inflation, they had major problems that they didn't know how to deal with, and just a general lack of clarity and lack of rationality. So that's, I think, basically what we're dealing with. There's a lot wrong with what Australia has done. There's a lot wrong with all of the lockdowns. There's a lot wrong with the government telling people if they need to get vaccinated or not. But that does not mean we are now living in the Third Reich or in communist Russia. What it does mean is that the realities of partial freedom are catching up with us. And maybe a lot of us, using the figurative us, thought it would be cute to just regulate the businessmen, just start with the billionaires and millionaires. Oh, don't worry. They have too much freedom. They don't need all of it. And then, we'll give a little free healthcare over here and a little bit of redistribution over there and just regulate that guy a bit over there. Yeah, well, guess what? You're it. Tag, you're it. Now, whether or not you get vaccinated is now everybody's business. And we have a weak medical industry unable to properly deal with this virus and many other problems, a police force that are not entirely sure what their job is either. And the list goes on of ways in which we are ill prepared to deal with this pandemic. And the worst of all is lack of clarity, lack of good philosophy. Generally, people are not sure where the line is between a narrative and actual reality. So again, the realities of our mixed economy, the realities of partial freedom is now catching up with everybody. So the bed is made.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And one more thing, the more you are upset about what's happening in Australia, the more you have to be very careful on what you report. And I say this thing, for example, in other areas. So quite often I disagree with people when they throw around numbers about the victims of communism, or they use stories that are not real. No, the more serious you want to be in terms of criticizing something, the more you have to be objective on how you approach it. So if you worry about what's happening in Australia, you cannot trust nutters and people who post videos that you have zero idea. Like if I tell you, show me in the map where this is in Australia, you probably wouldn't even be able to do this. So this is the first point. The second point is that how would you reply to this question? Because it's very easy to say, well, in principle, I'm against lockdowns. What would you reply to the Claire Lemons of the world, which says, look, you inflexible libertarians, when the pandemic ends, there's a very good chance that the United States is going to have 1 million people dying, or hopefully a bit less, but close to that point. And Australia is going to end up with something like, I don't know, 3,000, 4,000 dead people. So doesn't this show that when all this is said and done, that the quote pragmatist approach of Australia, which says do whatever works. Remember a tweet that Claire Lemon has sent in the beginning of the pandemic. She says, normally I'm kind of libertarian-ish, but now when the pandemic comes, I'm a centrist pragmatist. Lockdowns, whatever works. So could you say that these people are now vindicated and they say, look, 2,000 deaths versus almost 1 million dead people. Therefore, sorry, libertarians. I mean, in these people's minds, everyone's a libertarian. In our side, so sorry, libertarians, but your principles don't save lives. We have saved lives. Hundreds of thousands of lives.
I would answer, what is this preoccupation with saving lives? By which I mean, is life in itself an intrinsic value? We could literally lock everybody up in cages right now, and the government can keep us alive by giving us portions and medical care for as long as that would last. I mean, life, how does it go? Not dying is not living. So I would tell Claire Layman, it might seem like a cute idea to just say, yeah, to hell with those people's freedoms over there while you're comfortably making a living running an online magazine. But when you trade other people's liberty, you're really giving away your own liberty as well. And you're creating a system that's unsustainable. The chaos will ensue. And ultimately, you're not going to live a happy life. Ultimately, your kids are not going to be able to have as much liberty as maybe you had growing up. And ultimately, this whole thing is creating, like I said, it's creating the Weimar Republic. It's creating the Tower of Babel. There's an analogy I like using. We're unable to communicate. Now, you look at Tim Pool and you look at Claire Layman. It's not that one of them is 100% right and the other is 100% wrong. It's just they're taking different articles and calling those the essentials, when trying to understand the situation. So I guess that's the answer I would try to give Claire. But at the end of the day, I mean, I can't convince her of anything. I just know you can't use force on people and still say that people are living and you're saving lives. You're not saving human lives. Human beings need to be free.
I'm very curious also what our audience thinks. So again, it's very easy when we talk amongst ourselves to say, yes, rights are inviolable. But when I'm in the pub with my colleagues or with your family in the Christmas dinner, how would you make the case when someone says strict lockdowns, 2,000 deaths, you people who cherish your liberty, almost 800,000 deaths? So think about this and think about how you would approach, because again, this is not an easy question. These are not, or take the other question. Even many objectivists would claim that the state has a right, if you have the virus, to put you aside and protect other people from you. So would you then say that the Australian government has a right, indeed, to take people from their indigenous communities and put them in these quarantine camps because they are in a better, it's easier for them to isolate than if they would try to isolate somewhere else? And the question is, what if these people don't want to do it? Or what if everyone in that house says, no, it's okay, we are happy to risk getting the infection, but if indeed the state has a right to make sure that you're quarantined, if it's proven that you have this infection, then did Australia did the right thing? Now, these are very difficult questions, and I'm not sure I have the answers. So I'm not sure I have the answer to, for example, if we agree that the state has a right to stop you from spreading a disease that could possibly kill someone, where do we put the limit? To a mortality like the flu, for example, then we'd say, okay, that's too much. But where is it? Is it 0.1%? Is it with a fatality rate of 0.5%, of 1%? So this is very, very difficult, and I'm not even sure how we can come up with an answer. So I don't want to, start preaching from here like, oh, Australia's, and I don't want to take the middle ground. So I'm openly saying I haven't got an answer to this. This is very, very, very difficult question on how to approach it. And many people now is going to say that we become complacent with the regime. I know that many people were very pissed off that we had Amy's adults on our show. God knows why. I'm very curious where exactly they disagree. But I prefer to be honest and tell people that sometimes I don't have the answers, rather than just, claim that, oh, I have these 3 principles, and these 3 principles, I know how to apply them. By the way, that would be rationalism, saying I have the answer to everything, even though I don't know the context. So any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I'm the same way as you. I don't have answers to all these questions. There's a lot of deep questions that have to do with political philosophy and the application of certain principles when it comes to certain contexts, especially when there's something that seems a lot like an emergency. Look, I know jumping over to, let's say, foreign policy, if the Saudi government tries to nationalize an American billion-dollar oil company, I believe the American government should step in, and this is a protection of the rights of Americans' property and rights. However, if I get pickpocketed or mugged in walking through the streets of Saudi Arabia, I don't think the Americans need to send in their military for that. So where do you draw that line? It's a good question. Maybe the line is going to be somewhat boils down to the mood of a judge one day, wherever that line is, but most cases will be clearly on one side of the line or the other. These are good questions. So when it comes to the pandemic, there's a lot I don't know. What should the role of government be? Because the disease does exist. If it were more of an extreme virus or a disease like Ebola, let's say something that just kills people, makes them drop dead very quickly, then would the government's job then be more properly to force quarantine until this is gotten under control? And how long would it take them to get it under control? A year, a minute, a day? I don't have the answers to this. How do children factor in? If the indigenous people have kids and the indigenous people are, let's say, not as friendly to Western medicine as, you and I, and they don't want their kids vaccinated, or they don't want to, cooperate when it comes to any type of lockdowns. And this is just me projecting stereotypes onto the indigenous. For all I know, they are cutting edge of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. But how would that work? How does the protection of the rights of children and the protection of the rights of the neighboring people work? I truly don't know. But what I do know is reality is accessible to us, first of all, just in terms of assessing what's true. We need to stop letting our emotions sort of drive the car. I'm full of analogies and metaphors today. We need to stop running with emotions. We need to stop clinging to certain narratives and trying to use hyperbole and magnify every situation. There's a lot wrong with what the government is doing when it imposes lockdowns and puts people into quarantine. There's a lot wrong with that. You know what else is really wrong? When businessmen are put in prison for antitrust BS. So the person going to prison for antitrust BS, or the financier who goes to prison because Giuliani, charged him with some BS, that person going to prison might feel like we're living in Nazi Germany. But the fact is, we're not in Nazi Germany. And people who do make that claim need a serious reality check. They need to really, really get a closer look at what Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia were like to make that comparison. We need to be clear. We need to use reality as our guide. And so just when it comes to attaining knowledge, we need to really, really be sober. And then we need to be selfish. We need to really, really understand that the pursuit of the good life is everybody's right. And we are not going to trade anybody's pursuit of happiness, anybody's ability to pursue happiness beyond how their behavior is, let's say, killing somebody. And how to enforce that, again, I don't entirely know.
And you mentioned the Tower of Babel, and this is, in my mind, this is what tribalism leads to. Let me show you what the example I mean. I've said many times, tribalism literally makes you stupid. And I think this is how many people react to things around the pandemic since it became an issue of the culture wars. So I see more and more people saying, I'm not going to have the third dose. I had the first 2 doses. Now that's enough. So these people, in their mind, the fact that they had the 2 doses, it was like, what, you did a favor to the government of having them? Or notice how many people change their minds about the vaccines because of politics. So what you're basically saying is, something that has to do with me and my health, I will put my tribalist interest above that. Now, if you tell me, I've done my research, I don't believe that the vaccines are good, I say, okay, do your own thing. But there are people who have done the first 2 doses. They're happy with whatever, the antibody production. But then they say, I'm not going to do the third one because, see, you promised us. Charlie Kirk had a tweet today. He said, there's been 1 year since the vaccination, since the first person was vaccinated. Have vaccines given you your freedom? And the point is, I couldn't care less. I mean, I care a lot about my freedom, but I didn't get the vaccine as a political actor to get my freedom. I'm going to go and fight in the barricades if it needs to be for my freedom, but that has absolutely zero to do with why I took the vaccines. So when you confuse these things in your head, you're literally becoming more stupid. Tribalism literally makes you stupid. Or I saw another tweet today by Candace Owen, said something like, you're not allowed to interview Alex Jones, so therefore we're interviewing Alex Jones. Now, if you want to interview Alex Jones, if you think he has interesting things to say, go and interview him. But saying that because the left hates Alex Jones, now more and more we're going to reappropriate, what's the term to put, appropriate Alex Jones. Again, this is stupid. So your life decisions, who you think is a good thinker or a person who has things to tell you, if it has to do with what the other side believes, that's, again, you judge not based on your mind, but with the minds of others. And, I respect more Rogan who says, Alex Jones is my friend, we have good fun, whatever, rather than someone who says, because the left hates Alex Jones, now I'm going to talk to Alex Jones. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, putting aside Joe Rogan, I mean, it absolutely, the Republicans have become, or maybe they always were, the party of reactionaries. So whatever the left says, the Republicans either say not so fast, or they say, well, we're going to advocate the opposite, it seems, at least that's generally speaking. And certainly in recent years, it's just become insufferable. And yeah, it's very scary when someone as incoherent as Alex Jones is being treated like somebody worth interviewing. But
again, I can understand someone telling me, I want to interview Alex Jones because of this and this. Mm-hmm. But this is more like, I'm going to stick it to the other side. I know that if I interview Alex Jones, I'm going to piss them off. Therefore, I'm going to do it. Again, this is the opposite, the other side of the second hander. Remember the contrarian artists in the Fountainhead whose only claim to fame was that they were doing monstrosities because everyone else would hate them. And these were the people around Toohey. So you think you're an independent spirit, But actually you're not, because again, your point of reference is not what is your judgment. Your point of reference is other people. What do other people believe? I'm going to do the opposite. And there's this very beautiful scene in The Fountainhead where someone asked Tuhi, why do you have all these contrarians around you? And it's, I thought you're against individualism. And Tuhi says something, are you sure these people are individualists? And he leaves. So, and again, it's this thing, when you're a contrarian, you're not an individualist. You're not an independent thinker. You let someone else set the agenda for your mind.
Fashionable nonconformist.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you were talking about the, people like getting vaccinated, like it's like they're doing a favor to the government. Like, okay, I'll get vaccinated and in exchange, I want such and such, but really you should get vaccinated if you believe it's going to, if you believe it's the right decision for yourself. It's, I mean, these certainly are troubling times, and this culture war has certainly divided us further than I would have thought possible. It's going to be very difficult to come back from all of this, but I take some comfort in remembering, like, the 1960s and 70s were a chaotic time, and somehow there was sort of a new dawn after, and life got back to semi-normal. Before it became chaotic again. Some would say anyway.
That's another. Anyway, Let's wrap up and see what the audience has to say.
All right. In the super chat, we got Marilyn with $2. Marilyn again with $4. Roland with €4.99 says, don't save my life. Give me liberty or give me death. Right. I mean, the argument goes, well, your liberty or you acting a certain way is spreading the virus, which can kill people. Again, I don't know how exactly to deal with a virus, but I know we are ill-equipped to deal with this because we don't have liberty. We don't have capitalism. We don't have people working at their maximum capacity to deal with the problems of nature, of reality, the ways in which this planet is not currently suitable for us. So liberty is the way out of this, and reason is indispensable for liberty. Robert with $2 says, so what is the solution to the trolley problem? Good question. Roland with €4.99 again says, quote, I would rather be exposed to the inconveniences attending too much liberty than those attending too small a degree of it, by a guy named Jefferson. Have you heard this guy? Jefferson? I don't know. I'm kidding. I think it was Tom Jefferson. Marilyn with $5 says, I am vaccinated and boosted. High risk people who could stay home still take the more high ground and expect masks. More on Clubhouse. Marilyn again with $2 says moral high ground. Tazy with £4.49 says many people call certain individuals contrarians, quote, when they just happen to have a POV they don't like. Winky face. Well, that winky face surely does display. Hold on, those emojis when criticizing and insulting people are always a real display of confidence. So keep including emojis when insulting us. Go ahead, Nikos.
No, I don't think. Wait. I don't think that anyone insulted us. But here's the thing, Tessie. I didn't call them contrarians. They call themselves contrarians. So I'm asking you, when Candace Owen says no one is supposed to talk to Alex Jones, therefore, what are we doing? We're talking to Alex Jones. Then you proudly say, I'm a contrarian. Again, I can understand Rogan saying, I have fun with Alex Jones so I can have a 4-hour episode. I've known this guy for 20 years. I think he's very talented and he's funny. And, I'm not taking it too much seriously. Well, that's one thing. And it's another thing saying, in the year 2021, I decide first time to talk to Alex Jones because I'm not supposed to talk to Alex Jones. So I'm not calling them contrarians. They're calling themselves contrarians. So.
Yep. Okay. And Tacy says in the regular chat, I'm talking about others that often use that comment. Well, I'm sorry if I came off a little bit on edge there.
No, that's true. That's true. And for many people, we are contrarians.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it seems that way, but we're not. So what are we going to do? All right. Yeah, I guess we can call it a wrap there. Hold on. Not another guitar channel with $5 Australian, which I think is worth, I don't know, maybe like a Greek penny at this point. I'm kidding. He goes, my annual family Christmas get together is for vax people only. So I have to visit some members separately. Family torn apart by big government. He earlier commented, he says, my great grandpa was sent to Australia as a 9-year-old because he was convicted of buggery in England. Well, I don't know what buggery is. Is that the same as burglary? In which case your great grandfather should have kept his paws off other people's bread and could have stayed out of trouble. You could be living in London right now and going to ARC UK events on the weekly. So why don't you thank your little great grandfather over there for ruining your life by getting in trouble? All right. I felt like I had some more thoughts, but I kind of lost sight of them by the time I was up to speak. So, I mean, what do we really add to all of this? We know reason, liberty, and selfishness are the way out of this. Capitalism. I know those people who agree with what I'm saying could still say that I'm misreading the situation, but I don't claim to entirely understand the situation. I don't claim to know how bad Australia is or how bad Canada is. We got Christopher has been heckling me the whole show saying I'm not reading the writings on the wall and I'm pissed about something. Like literally I said we're in the Weimar Republic. Is that not reading the writings on the wall to you? Saying we're in Germany in the 1920s or whatever. That's what we're looking at. That's not good enough. I need to say we're literally in Auschwitz right now to be reading the writings on the wall. Maybe I am pissed at something.
By the way, Rucka,
yeah,
who was the political camp who threw the Nazi guy? It was the left, and we were making fun of them. When they said Trump is literally Hitler, we said, no, you are A, stupid, B, completely ignorant of history. So yes, something could be very, very bad. The government reaction to COVID has been historically in historic proportions bad, but you can be something in historic proportion bad. It's not Nazi Germany, and you don't help or persuade anyone by calling it Nazi Germany. And let me tell you something else. Next time Tim Pool says something about Australia, because this time he didn't use his independent judgment on these sources that he used, it will be more difficult to make the case of criticize the government. So again, be objective. You can only win even when it comes to your understanding or how you persuade other people. So that would be my final message. I won't be able to.
Well, come on. I got a thought. I know we're dragging this out. This is not the smoothest outro ever, but so someone like Tim Pool, I've always considered kind of unclear. He's unclear with himself. He jumps to conclusions based on some evidence. I believe he means what he says. I don't consider him to be dishonest at all, but he should not be in the position he's in. This would not happen if there was any barrier to entry. Nothing against him. You and I wouldn't be here. I certainly wouldn't be here, but for the internet. But I mean, this is going to blow up in all of our faces one of these days. The fact that someone like Alex Jones is even a household name. This should not be and I understand the mainstream media has been betraying our trust for a very, very, very long time. And people have a right to say, yes, we should have alternative news. But what I've been saying on this show for what seems like forever is that alternative news is like the mainstream news minus any semblance of credibility, and just complete any kook job around the world can now say anything that he feels is true. And if he says it in a sexy fashion, people might run with it. Yes, Nikos, go ahead.
Having said that, quite often, as with the Covington kids or with the Rittenhouse case, some alternative media have done a way better job than mainstream media. So credit when it is credit where it's due.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm holding this right here. This DVD I was reminded of recently. It's called Good. It's got the little Blockbuster sticker at the bottom. I think Blockbuster was going out of business, so they're giving these away for $1 or whatever. I think if I recall, this is a British movie. They made it in England, so all the Nazis, all the Germans have British accents, because that's how professional and imaginative the British are when they make movies. They have Germans speaking English with accents. No offense if anyone British is watching this at ARC UK. And basically, it's about a hyper intellectual guy in Germany. He's basically a good person. He doesn't want to believe that what's happening in front of him is happening, and he keeps evading it. Finally, at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, he finds himself like guarding a concentration camp, and he's like, wait, this really happened? Like, how did this happen? You know? Yeah. So I don't want to be that guy. But at the same time, how do we stop from becoming hysterics? How do we stop from becoming the left, right? We don't like the left. We don't like how the left calls people Nazis all the time. Well, I think we better avoid resembling them by pointing that finger prematurely. I hope we never actually need to point that finger, because I never want to see the Nazis goose stepping again. Coming up at 7 p.m. UK time is Enjoy Parenting with Lisa Van Dam and Kyle Steele. I always do this when I say that, sounds like an action movie duo. And I imagine parenting is more of an action movie situation than even anything Schwarzenegger or Jean-Claude Van Damme ever dealt with. But I digress. That's coming up. And then, by the way, if you're in Austin, Texas, or anywhere nearby it, tonight is the night. Yaron Brook versus Yoram Chatzoni, live in person. Blood sports. They are going for the kill. It's a fight to the finish. The rule is there are no rules. Meet us there. Those of us that are nearby. It's going to be cool. And
I'm really jealous of you.
Well, that's what you get for living in the old world instead of the one that Columbus was kind enough to discover and undisputedly be the first person to ever set foot on. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm kidding, of course.
No Clubhouse for me. I have for some reason, I can't connect to Wi-Fi from my phone, and I can't connect to anything from my phone except from the computer, so I can't join you today.
Okay, and the debate between the two Israelis is at 7 p.m. Texas time. You figure out what that means to you. I have
late.
I need to have a drink of water, that is. And then
also let's tell people we're gonna do a recap on that discussion at some point soon.
I think later this week that's happening.
Not tomorrow, because probably not enough time, but we'll see. The boss is gonna tell us.
Probably not tomorrow. Also, anyway, enough housekeeping. I'll jump on Clubhouse now for about 10 minutes so you all can yell at me if you want, and then Jesus Christ, I need a vacation. All right, bye everybody, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.